a yeshiva there because it seems like a lot of refugees went there.
Yes, were you able to hear me at all?
This is the first time since you started speaking that we were able to hear you clearly.
Okay, hold on, I'm going to dial in 1 second.
Oh, the story with the dial Daf was a very funny story. That was a good story. Where since he was such a exacting customer,
he turned everybody else off.
Yeah, that's right. That was a good story. Now, all the people who used to use dial Daf and would suddenly, without any explanation, it would go dead. Now they know the answer. That was a good one. Good morning, Avigdor. Good morning, Ephraim.
Morning.
Morning.
So let's get started. A sukkah that's not 10 tvachim high is not a kosher sukkah. Where do we get this from? 10 tvachim. So this is going to be a little bit of a fascinating Gemara. Minolam, how do we know that in order to be considered a normal wall, a normal height building, that it has to be 10 tvachim high? Before Itma, we learned the following 4 people. Okay, Akiva, we should be able to hear you now.
Okay, yes, sorry. I just wanted, back to what you mentioned about Dr. Deanna. Nobody played up the fact that he was a doctor. I think that's a big deal. None of the grandkids are studying to be doctors, or the great-grandkids.
I don't think he was.
Did they mention what was he a doctor in?
He was a microbiologist.
Did they say anything about it? To be a doctor is a minimum 8 years or 10 years of study.
Yeah, no, they said that in Italy he was a doctor and he had a PhD. And when he came to Canada, it was very difficult for him to get his credentials recognized. He had to recertify, and all the tests were only given on Shabbos. So it was an uphill battle for him.
Okay. But still, to become a doctor was still a big deal. Even in Italy, I'm sure it's a big deal to become a doctor. Not everyone does.
Everyone's a doctor of pasta.
Right?
He was a doctor of microbiology.
Listen, it's just as hard to become a doctor as it is to write a sefer, right, Dave?
No, I think it's a little harder. No one tested me on anything. I have to go through examinations.
Okay, so let's see the Gemara. Minolan, Itmar, Rab, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Chaviva. These 4 people, Masnu, they said. So it's a memory that we're quoting from all 4 of these people. However, Zok the Gemara, the Chula Seder Moed, but in Seder Moed, which we're in now, Kol Kihai Zuga, whenever it's understandable, whenever such a, now I feel like a little bit I made up. Anytime we list off this group of people, you should always swap out Rabbi Yochanan, Chalufi Rabbi Yochanan, Umaili Rabbi Yochanan, and put Rabbi Yochanan in. So I guess here we're quoting from a group that includes Rabbi Yochanan. And this is what we quoted. Aron Tisha, we know the Aron was 9 tvachim high. Because the Aron, the Torah tells us, is an amma and a half. An amma, we know, is 6 tvachim. So 6 times 1.5 is 9. So the Aron was 9 tvachim high. The kapara is tefach, and the Gemara is going to struggle to find a makar that the kapara was 1 tefach high. So if you have 9 tefachim plus the thickness of the kaparis, so to the top of the Aron, to the top of the kaparis is 10 tefachim. Harei kan asara. So why is that significant in what a barrier is? Because the pasuk says weiter, "Chsiv v'nei adati lecha sham v'dibarti itra me'al kaparis." I will get together with you there, we'll rendezvous there, and I'll talk to you from on the kaparis, which means that the Shechina Kavayachol comes down to right above the kaparis. Of course, there are burns from everywhere. So the Shechina is a higher concentration. I don't understand, and I'm not going to understand the next half Amud. I don't have a clue what I'm talking about, but I'm going to read the words of the Gemara. So the Shechina comes down and spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu from right above the kaparis.
There's another pasuk that talks about the Shechina was between the Kruvim as well. Yes. So it narrows it down. So,
exactly, but height-wise, we're focusing on the height. The height of the Shechina was 10 tefachim above the ground, above the kaparis. The Tanya of Yosy Eimer, and we learned a memory from Yosy, morning. The Shechina never crossed down into human territory below 10 Tvachim. And Moshe and Eliyahu never went above 10 Tvachim. So 10 Tvachim is the line that doesn't get crossed, not by man going up and not by the Rebbe going down. There's a lot of Torah on why Hashem made this barrier. So Rabbi Dessler says that the reason why Hashem made this barrier is because man has to know that our job isn't the Krich and the Himmelin. Our job is to live our life down on this world. That was Moshe Rabbeinu's target to the Malach. The reason why mankind should get the Torah is because the Torah has to be performed on this world. This world was designed to do all of the mitzvahs of the Torah. So a person has to know that he has no business kriching up in Shemayim. A person has to be very well grounded, very practical, and live his life here using the Torah as our guiding light. Shneimar, it says in the pasuk, Hashemayim Shemayim Hashem, the Aretz Nasan of Ne'odam. Hashem is above 10 and we're below 10. Blew up? We have no business going up there. Okay. Frank the Gemara.
Yes,
so then Gemara.
In isn't 10 Tvachim also Rishus on its own? Don't we say
Shabbos,
something above 10?
Above 10 Tvachim in Hilchos Shabbos, above 10 Tvachim in Rishus HaRabim is a Mokum Tur.
Right. Just Yachid is 10 is below, right?
The Rishus HaYachid is Adler Rakia. The Rishus HaYachid is Adler Rakia. You have your airspace all the way up. The Rishus HaRabim only goes up to 10 Tvachim. So if we're going to read of Chassidus already, I'll add that this is the Makar. This is the Makar since it's a different Rishus. Below 10 Tvachim and above 10 Tvachim, the place where the Boy Shalom is a different Rishus from where man is. That's one of the reasons that the Pois can bring down in the Shulchan Aruch as to why we don't say Kiddush Levada on Friday night. We don't say it on Friday night because when we're going to greet your Boy Shalom, we're like going out from Rishus to Rishus because we're reaching into the heavens to greet their Boy Shalom. And that's why we don't say Kiddush Ravana. Although the Posh can say that that there are certain Posh can hold that if you're not going to be able to make it because it's raining or this, then you should even do it Friday night. So there's a shaila about that as well. Okay, fact the Gemara, like when they deliver a package to make a chayv in the hospital. Is that what you meant? Fact the Gemara. Are you telling me that the Shekhinah never comes down into our domain? It says, Hashem came down onto Har Sinai. And for the Gemara, the Shekhinah was hovering, not right on the mountain. It wasn't boots on the ground. It was hovering 10 Tvachim above Har Sinai. In fact, the Gemara even more explicit. Amdu Raglov by Yoimahu al Har Zaysim. And this is in the Navi, I believe, is talking about when Mashiach comes, Hashem is going to blow up Har Zaysim and it's just going to be flat land. But it says, Amdu Raglov Kavayachal by Yoimahu al Har Zaysim. So the Gemara once again, Lamayla Meyasarit. It's not mamish boots on the ground, it's above 10 Tvachim. Again, I don't understand what this exactly means. For the Olam Moshe, the Eliyahu, Lamorim, now the Gemara starts from the other side. Moshe and Eliyahu never went up into Shemayim. The pasuk says Moshe Allah El Halakim by the Kabbalah Satira. The Gemara Lamata Meyasar. Even though he was on top of the mountain, he stayed within 10 Tvachim of the ground. Vaksiv Ayal Eliyahu B'Sara Hashemayim. Again, the Gemara says Lamata Meyasar. So Eliyahu is always a question because what do you mean Eliyahu flies all around the place? Okay? Eliyahu's everywhere. How is it possible? So the Gemara Erevin, I think we learned it with Erevin. The Gemara asks, how is it possible that Eliyahu goes to every bris on Shabbos? It's Tchum Shabbos. How does he get out of Tchum? So the Gemara answers that there is two Eliyahs. Eliyahu has two personas. He has the Eliyahu of a guf, and when he's human, like people of Gil Eliyahu, they need Eliyahu Navi. When he's human, he has to conform to all of the halachas. He's a human, and he has to act like a human on this ground, on this earth, and he can't go above 10 Tvachim. But then Eliyahu sometimes has the form of a malach. And it's brought down, I think by the Chassam Sofer, that when Eliyahu Navi went up to Shemayim, so to speak, his guf went to Gan Eden on this world. We know there's a Gan Eden on this world. We don't know where it is, and his neshama went up to Shemayim, and from time to time, and his guf, so from time to time, is activated, so to speak, and that's people of Gil Eliyahu, and his neshama does other things, such as fly around to everyone's bris and do things that are l'mayla mayasar. And the Asad Lavoi, when Mashiach comes, it's brought down that we don't have smicha anymore. We lost the smicha of Moshe Rabbeinu that came down from Shemayim. It's lost, it's severed. So how are we going to reestablish smicha to once again reestablish the Sanhedrin? Because Eliyahu, Hanavi, Pinchas, Eliyahu, he got smicha from Asnil ben Knaz. So he was actually connected directly to the real smicha. Once his neshama goes back into his guf and he's resurrected, he's going to come back to life and he'll have smicha. And he'll be able to create a new Sanhedrin by being masmich other people. Yes.
This is a little strange. The first proof that the Gemara brings about the Aron, it brings a pasuk, and the pasuk said, it goes to explain that it has to be above 10 tefachim based on the pasuk. All of these cases that the Brisa brings now, the Gemara has to say fakir from what the pasuk says, Stan. The pasuk here seems to imply, each one of these, the pasuk implies the Kodesh Baruch Hu came down to the mountain, and Moshe and Eliyahu went up to Shemayim. And it doesn't bring any proof that it's not that way. Just the Gemara just says, but not like the pasuk. It seems like a strange kind of retort.
I hear. I mean, this whole thing is very difficult to understand. Let me ask you a question. When the Kohen Gadol stood in front of the Aron Kodesh, was he not considerably taller than the Aron? He was much more than 9 tefachim, right? But Hashem is above 10 tefachim. So how did that work? I don't understand that. I can read the words of the Gemara, but I don't really understand what's happening here. So I would agree with you. I don't understand.
But I'm just asking from a textual case here. None of these. This is not a good proof that it says that the Kodesh Baruch Hu came down to the mountain, and then we say, but he didn't. Don't read it like the pasuk says. Well,
the proof is from the fact that Hashem spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu from right on top of the kapparos, and we know the kapparos was 10 tefachim high. So that means we know Hashem spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu from right above the level of 10 tefachim.
Very good. So that's how we know that. So how do we know he didn't come down?
The Gemara is trying to extract from there that since the demarcation point between man and the Rebbeinu Shalom, the 10 tefachim, so that must be a considerable rishus. Rashi says,
that's
Rishus. Which means if it's Rishus, it's logical to argue that a wall should be 10 tefachim.
So that's one pasuk that says like that, and now we have 3 psukim that go the other way. And the Gemara is saying ignore these.
The Gemara is not saying ignore these. The Gemara is saying you're not understanding it properly.
You're not understanding it properly, without any explanation, just not like that. Okay.
That's exactly what the Gemara is saying. Yeah, that's what Rashi says. It's a teretz. But I hear it, asking. It's a difficult Gemara. You're saying why? Quote unquote, why make an excuse for 3 psukim and understand 1? Why did you make an excuse for 1 and understand 3? That's what you suggest. Yeah. I know, I hear what you're saying. Okay, Zok Gemara weiter. V'aksiv me'aches pnei kisei. Now, Pasuk shot in this pasuk is not the way it's being darshan, but the Pasuk shot in the pasuk is ma'aches pnei kisei, is that the clouds that the Rebbeinu Shalom makes, he suspends on the ceiling. The ceiling is the rakia. So ma'achas pnei is referring to the rakia, which you can grab onto. It almost has a mamashus, a thickness to it. And parshas alav ananoi, and then Hashem suspended his clouds on the rakia. But we dash in this pasuk. One more Avtachim dash in this pasuk. Alamet shapiris shakai miziv shchinasai. Hakadosh Baruch Hu took part of the shchina, the ananu alav, and hung it on him, which also seems it's ma'achas pnei. Someone's going to grab it. So clearly, there's part of the shchina that's within our grabbing range. So Gemara once again, lamata me'asara. It's lamata me'asara. But Gemara, forget about what its height is. Somebody is sticking his hand. Talk about Moshe Rabbeinu. who held onto the Kisei HaKavod. So Moshe Rabbeinu is sticking his hand up into the domain of the Rebbeinu Shalom. So once again, you see that there's the crossing of that line. So tomorrow, that's not what happened. Is to Revuve, is to Ravav like Kisei Adasara. Moshe doesn't stick his hand into the domain of the Shemayim. Rather, Hashem made it that his Kisei HaKavod should be extended down into our territory, into below 10. So once again, as Avigdor noted, we're really working hard to make everything fit in with our theory that 10 is the demarcation. The Nakat Pei, and that's how Moshe Rabbeinu was able to grab onto it.
I found not everything could be reduced to pshat. Okay, there's some things that pshat just does not work.
Is that the name of the second sefer?
Well, no, I've mentioned it in the first.
Not everything can be simply
Not
pshat.
everything could be reduced to pshat. There are obvious psukim that it's impossible to learn on a pshat level.
So it tells us that the Torah's meanings are much, much deeper than what meets the eye.
Yeah. In other words, it could be a completely opposite. Chazal say that Ruvain was not Mizana, yet the pasuk says he was Mizana. So we have to, twist ourselves into a pretzel so that is not, you can't learn pshat there.
Dave, we can quote you on that. Dave, is it okay to quote?
You could quote me on that. Not only that, the Torah sometimes it will exaggerate greatly, and it wouldn't. The simple words don't work. For instance, the Torah says that the chaimus of the walls of the fortified cities go up to Shemayim, right? It doesn't go up to Shemayim. They're tall.
Maybe they go above 10 tefachim.
It's a guzma. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, Zok to Gemara. Vishlama Aron Tisha. Where do we get this from? That the Aron is 9 tefachim high. We have a pasuk that tells us quite clearly. Yechsev also Aron Atzei Shitim Amasayim V'Chetzi Arkai V'Ama V'Chetzi Rachbai V'Ama V'Chetzi Kemasai. So an Am and a half is 6 plus 3 is 9 tefachim. Elakaparis tefach minolam. Where do we get it from that the kaparis was a tefach? So the Tani Reb Chanina, Kol HaKelim she'asa Moshe, every keli in the Beis Hamikdash or in the Mishkan that Moshe Rabbeinu made, Nasna ben Torah midas Arkan, umidas Rachvan, umidas Kemasan. The Rebbeinu Shalom, the Torah gave us all 3 of its dimensions. However, kaparis midas Arkan, midas Rachva, Nasna, we know it's the same size as the Aron itself. But midas kaimasa loinasna. The Torah never tells us how thick that tablet that covers the Aron should be. So how do we know the thickness of the kaparis? Say lamad mipachash of a keli. Let's learn it from the smallest keli. We'll say that it's at least as thick as the smallest keli. Shenemar. What is the smallest keli? On the shulchan it says vasisa loy miskeres tefach savir. You should make a rim around the shulchan that's 1 tefach. So the miskeres was a keli. Ma lalon tefach. Just like the keli called miskeres was a tefach. Afkan tefach. So too we'll say we have the kaparis, which we don't know. The Torah wasn't megala to us, but its size was. We'll assume the minimum size that it could be is a tefach. In fact, the Gemara and Nelach Mikalim Gifayu learn from other kalim which are much bigger than that. And for the Gemara, tefasta meruba loy tefasta mua tefasta. Rashi has a whole arichas on that, and Rashi says if you're told to take a few things and you take 1 or 2, if worse comes to worse, and the person who meant to take a few things meant to give you 5, he'll give you some extra, but you didn't take anything that wasn't yours. But if you take 5 things when you said take a few things, and he really only meant 2, he's going to have to come and take them away from you. So therefore, always stick to the smallest understanding of the meaning of the word. In fact, the Gemara, if that's the case, so I'll find you a keli that's even smaller. That's even smaller than the thick. That's even smaller than a tefach. So the Mefarshim just speak out. What is the significance of the papyrus being a tefach thick? A tefach is the width of 4 fingers, right? A tefach is 4 fingers, and we know that the Aron HaKodesh together with the Luchos represent Torah Shebeksav. The papyrus represents Torah Shebal Peh, and Torah Shebal Peh has to always be chazed at least 4 times to get clear, which is also the reason why the first 4 lines of the Gemara are always the first 4 lines of Rashi and of Tosfos. And that's also to tell us that Torah Shebal Peh has to be chazed 4 times, and that could be the remez in the thickness of the papyrus, which represents Torah Shebal Peh. So Zak the Gemara, V'nelech mitzitz. Maybe you should learn it from the tzitz, which is thinner than that. The Tanya, Rashi says it's smaller. We'll soon see how big it is. The Tanya we learned, tzitz doime kemin tas shosov. Tzitz was like a not a tablet. It was like a plate of gold. V'rachav bezet spois. It was only 2 fingers wide, which would be half of a tefach. Umukaf my oizen loizen. It went across the Kohen Gadol's forehead from ear to ear. The cost of a love, and it says on it, Beis Shitin. It has 2 lines on it. Yud K Milamala, the Shem Hashem on the top line, the Kodesh Lamed Milamata. And the Kodesh Lamed Milamata, we'll get into why it was configured this way. I saw it in Rome, and we had that story where they were able to save the daughter of the emperor from an illness that they brought upon her, because they got into cahoots with the shade that possessed the daughter, and then they magically solved it. So they were told that they can go and take whatever they want from the storehouse of the king, and in there they saw the tits, but all they took was the gzeris that the king wrote on the Klal Yisrael and tore them up. So the Chaz of Allah, and then the one that I saw in Rome, the Chaz of Allah Kodesh Lashem B'Shita Achas, it was only 1 row. So the first question is, this is like a very weird situation. We know the wording on the tzitz is Kodesh Lashem. So why would you write Kodesh Dalet on the bottom line and Lashem on the top line? That's a little bit muddy, right? So the Mefarshim tell us is because it's not appropriate to write anything above Hashem's name. You're going to ask me, what about the Sefer Torah? Bereshit bara Elokim, it says Hashem's name way down. The Torah says when the Torah is writing a story, so that Hashem's name is where it belongs. But when you're making something that's the emphasize the kedusha of Hashem, the word Hashem has to be on top. But the problem is that it's backwards, because if you read it Kodesh Hashem and Kodesh Dalet on the bottom, it still doesn't make sense, right? Kodesh Dalet on the bottom doesn't make sense. So Tosfos gives us a little bit of a clarity of what they did. So I'm going to look at the second Tosfos first, and then we'll do the first Tosfos. The second Tosfos is Kodesh.
Why can't it be side by side? Wasn't it
Kodesh? Because then the Kodesh and the Lamed precedes the name of Hashem, which has to be the most prominent.
Okay. Okay.
So Tosfos says Kodesh Lamed Milamata Yesh Mefarshim Lamata Mamish Zel L'mayla Mizeh, and that Tosfos says V'lo Nistaber the Ein Zeh Kedech Kriyosa. You don't read it from bottom to top. So therefore, Tosfos learns it was opposite. It was an extended line, but the Kodesh Lamed was on the first part of the line, lower down. The Shem and the Shem Hashem was beside Shita Elyoina. So you read it from right to left, but the first couple of letters, the Kodesh Lamed, was a little lower than the Hashem. That's what Tosfos learns, which is also a little bit mudna, because it's not a normal way to write things. So Rabbi Rosner spoke up from somebody very, very nice. When it says Kodesh Hashem, who's it talking about? Who's Kodesh Hashem? The Big Kahuna? Beis Hamikdash? What is Kodesh Hashem? Kodesh Hashem is referring to Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael is Kodesh Hashem. And where is Klal Yisrael referenced? In the Choshen. The Choshen lists off all of the Shvatim. So when you're reading it, you're actually starting from the Choshen. You're reading the whole Choshen, and after you read all the Shvatim, Kodesh L'Shem, Klal Yisrael is Kodesh L'Shem. So you're actually coming from the Choshen. So it makes sense that you should start the line lower, because you're actually coming from the Choshen, and then you're reading Kodesh L'Shem, referring to Klal Yisrael.
There's a lot more that's being written before.
But it's all below. So
This, this,
so I guess you read it that and you come back up. Okay, so I tried.
as far as the big day kahuna is concerned, I mean, we're talking about the tzitz, right? So as far as the big day kahuna, you have the mitznefes, which is higher than the tzitz kodesh Hashem.
But it's not. There's nothing written on it. There's nothing written on it. But it's interesting you bring it up. The bottom Tosfos swings all the way over, talks about what the tzitz was. We learned the tzitz was on the coin's forehead, although Tosfos brings a shita that the tzitz was on the coin's head. It was in the place where a coin could have worn tefillin. So there's a whole big shaila as to what the tzitz was. But there's another problem here. Are you allowed to say, when we say Shem Hashem, we say Yud K Vav K. We don't say the actual letters because we don't even spell out Hashem's name. Yet the Gemara is doing that, right? The Gemara is saying, the Gemara just said it, that Yud Hey Milamala. So Tosfos comment on that. So let's look at the first Tosfos. Yud Hey Milamala, Avavisha Yud Hey Shem Gomer. Shem Gomer. Those two letters do spell an entire Shem. Ein Zeh Hoige Shem Be'osi Oisa. So the label for the Avera, the label for the violation is called Hoige Shem Be'osi Oisa. It's also to do Hoige Shem Be'osi Oisa. It's also to pronounce Hashem's name just by spelling its letters. So Zok Tosfos, since Yud K is not a full name of Hashem, therefore it's not called Hoige Shem Be'osi in Masker Shtei Oisios. Since it doesn't say Yud K Vav K, the Gemara just said Yud K, that's why it wouldn't be a problem. Even the Eina Meskirin L'Shem Shem Shalom, because really it was Yud K Vav K written on the tzitz. And the Gemara is only talking about the first two letters, that's why it wasn't a problem for the Gemara to write that. But there's another pshat in the Hoige Shem Be'osi Pirsh B'Kuntrish Shedoris Oisios Shal Shem Ben Arbaim Ushtayim. That's when there's a problem. But Zok Tosfos, even though the real Isser of Hoige Shem Be'osi is only saying all the letters of the Shem Hashem, we're makbid on all Shemis. And that's why we say Yud Kei Vav Kei, because we don't want to be Hoige Shem Be'osi. We don't even want to spell the name of Hashem.
There was a time in history where they actually pronounced the name of Hashem, the real pronunciation, during the time of Rus, and even by Moshe Rabbeinu and Parai. Parai said, Mi Hashem, you were saying the name. Parai himself said the name. Moshe had to identify which God we're talking about. So what do you mean?
I guess Parai wasn't makbid on being Hoige Shem Be'osi.
Well, neither was Moshe Rabbeinu when speaking to Paro.
I hear. So I'm not sure how that works. Why it was allowed then, it's not allowed now.
And the time of Rus, it was allowed also, and there's Torah on that, why it was allowed. But people, there were times where the name was actually pronounced. So
it was said by Boaz. 1 second. Who said it in Rus times? It was Boaz?
I think it was.
He said Hashem Imachem.
He was greeting the workers.
That's right. And there's a bunch of Torah that he pronounced it the real pronunciation.
I don't know the answer.
And anyway, were you saying that in the tzitz itself it only says the hey and not Yud Kei Vav Kei?
No, it says Yud Kei Vav Kei, but the Gemara is only mentioning the first two letters. But Avada it says all four letters.
Okay.
Because I guess in all the pictures that I always saw, it says Kodesh Lashem with the Dalet at the end of it and an apostrophe.
They wanted to see how lucid he was. The Gemara asked him to write something. So they look at the paper, and the nurse was very surprised. So the attendant, the fellow said, why are you so surprised? And she says, because usually when we ask a patient to write something, they write their name on a piece of paper. Meanwhile, here on the piece of paper, it says, Shivisi Hashem L'Neki Somi, right? So they showed it to him time. So time said, you can't write your name on a piece of paper because the Shulchan Aruch says that somebody's going to write something on top of your name. So you can't do that. Right after anesthesia, after he woke up, he already was quoting Allah.
So he's a good businessman. He's a good lawyer. Okay. Zok the Gemara weiter. Zok the Gemara. So Zok the Gemara, The reason why we don't say that the kapayas is only 2 tvachim thick, like the size of the tzitz, is done in kli mikli, being done in kli mitachshit. We learn the dimensions of a keli, such as the kapayas, from a keli, but not from a tachshit, just an ornament on the kohen gadol. In fact, the Gemara. So if you want to focus on the kli, v'nelef mizer, the crown that went around some of the kelim, the shulchan, which was much smaller. Damar zer mashu. So the Gemara done in kli mikli, being done in kli mehechsher kli. You learn kli from the full kli, not from something that's only a hechsher kli. In fact, the Gemara ihachi miskeres nami hechsher kli. The miskeres was like a rim around the shulchan. That's also only a hechsher kli. It's not the etzem kli. It's not what's holding up the bread. So the Gemara miskarte lamata haisa. We could learn that the miskeres wasn't a rim around the tabletop. On top of it, rather it was below it, holding it up. Once it's holding it up, it's functional, and then it's a keli itself. So the Gemara, that really works out well. If you learn that the construction of the shulchan was such that this miskeres was a band that went from leg to leg all the way around, was underneath the tabletop, and it supported it, then you can argue that it's a keli. But according to the mandama who learns that this miskeres was a rim around the tabletop, that's not a keli. That's a hechsher keli. So hechsher keli. So how do you know to learn that the kaparis is a tefach thick? And why are you learning it from the miskeres? We want to learn the kaparis, which the Torah gave us most of its dimensions, just missing one dimension, from other places where the Torah specifically says what its dimensions are, such as the misgeres. By the tzitz and the zer, the Torah doesn't mention anything about their thickness. So therefore, we'd rather not learn kapiris from those two cases. Rav Huna has another source of how you know that the kapiris was a tefach thick, because it says al pinei hakapiris kedma. The kapiris was referred to as a face, the face of the kapiris. Vein panim pasach pachos mitefach. Rashi says vein panim shel adam chus mitefach. The smallest size of a face is a tefach. In fact, the Gemara, why when you say panim do you assume it means the face of a person? Maybe it's ka'ape, the Bar Yuchni, we said that's a massive bird, and it one of its eggs once cracked and flooded 60 cities. So for surely its face is considerably bigger than a human. So the Gemara, the same as far as before, tafasta merubah, tafasta mu, tafasta. You always stick to the smallest option. In fact, the Gemara, ve'ema ka'ape de tziparta, the zutatuba. Maybe it should be the face of a hummingbird, which is minuscule. Amar Bacha Bayakov, Rafuna Penei Gamar. He's not just saying it says Penei by Kapoyers, and therefore we can compare it to any available Penei. Rather, it's sort of Exeris Shova from another place which says Penei. Ksiv Hachal Penei Kapoyers. Ksifasam is Penei Yitzchak Aviv. So it's referring to the face of Yitzchak, which was a human face, and that's where we get a tefach from. In fact, the more of a Nelach Mipanim Shalmaila, maybe it refers Kavayachal to the face of their Rebbeinu Shalom, which is limitless in size. So once again, the Gemara says, "Tafasta meruba loy tafasta, tafasta mula tafasta." In fact, the Gemara v'nelach mikruv. Maybe it should have the face of a kruv. Chsiv el hakapoyres yiyu pinei hakaruvim. You see, the word pinei is used in reference to the kruvim. Amar Rabbi Chabayaka Gemiri, we learned ain't pinei kruvim chusam mitefach. The kruvim were the same size. So if you want to live in the kruvim, that's fine. It's still a tefach. Rav Huna nami mehachagamer. Rav Huna also, who said Pnei, actually would agree that it comes from the kruvim, which were a tefach. Umay kruv. What is a kruv? What is the word kruv? Where does the word kruv come from? Tomorrow, Amabro Karavia, a little child. She came to Bavel currently Yanuka Ravia. So the Russian kruv means like a child. Amar Abaye. So Abaye asked, in Yecheskel, where the Navi is describing the Merkava, describing the Kisha covered. And then one side, there was a Pnei Kruv. Who Pnei Hasheni, Pnei Adam. Hainu Kruv, Hainu Adam. We just say that a Kruv is a human. It's a human face. So what do you mean one side has the mus of a person and one has the mus of a Kruv? They both look identical. So what is it? So tomorrow, The human face is a more mature-looking face. And the kruv is a more young, a youthful, a child face. But size-wise, they're both the same. The Gemara, umimai dechalala asar. So now that we finally came to the agreement that the aron is 10 tefachim high, who said that when this? What did we say? We say the sukkah has to be a minimum of 10 tefachim high. But we're saying it has to be 10 tefachim of clear space, and on top of that, the schach has to be. The Gemara, umimai dechalala asara bar mischacha. Who said that we learned that a sukkah has to be 10 tefachim high, and then the schach is above that? Ema bahadi schach. Maybe with the schach it's 10 tefachim high, but the inside is a little bit less. It's like when you talk about a warehouse ceiling, you talk about 15 feet clear, 22 feet clear. Maybe you look at what's inside the sukkah. So maybe you look at what's outside the sukkah. So how do you know that the inside of the sukkah has to be 10 tefachim high? Maybe including the schach, it only has to be 10 tefachim high. You were saying something? Ella and for the Gemara, mi beis olam and gamar. We're going to learn it from the Beis Hamikdash, which was called the Beis Olam. Yichsiv Abayis Asher Bona Melech Shlomo Lashem, the house that the Shlomo Melech built. Shishim Ama Orkoi, it was 60 amas long. The Esrim Rochboi, and 20 amas wide. Ushloishim Ama Kaimasoi, and it was 30 amas high. Uchsivit says, Koimas HaKruva Echad Eser Ba'ama. The kruv of Shlomo Melech was Eser Ba'ama. Now the kruvim that Shlomo Melech made were not placed on top of the urn. They stood on the floor beside the urn, and they were 10 amas high, meaning they took up 1/3 of the height of the heichal, of the kodesh hakodeshim. V'cheina kruv hasheni, and the same for the second kruv. With Tanya we learned, ma matinu bebeis elonim, kruvim b'shlish habayis hemandim. Just like in the Beis Hamikdash that Shlomo built, the top of the kruv was 1/3 up to the height of the wall, so it was 10 amas out of 30. So the Mishkan, even though in the Mishkan the Kruvim sat on top of the Aron, nevertheless, Mishkanami Kruvim b'shlish habayis einondim. The top of the Kruvim there also reached 1/3 of the height of the Mishkan. So let's do the math. Mishkan kamahaba. How tall was the Mishkan? Eser amas. We know it was 10 amas high. The height of the Krushim, Eser amas or hakeresh. So that clearly tells us that the height of the Mishkan was 10 amas. We know each amma is 6 tvachim. So 10 amas times 6 tvachim would be a total of 60 tvachim. Kama havalu, shitin pushchi. The height of the Mishkan was 60 tvachim. Talse kama havat, 1/3 of 60 tvachim is how much? Esrim pushchi. That means the top of the kruvim reached 20 tvachim. So let's do the math now. Dal asara the aron v'kapayos. We've already established that the aron and the kapayos were 10 tvachim, which means the kruvim could have also only been 10 tvachim high. Pashalu asara. There had to be 10 tvachim. Uksivit says, "V'hayu akruvim parsei knafayim l'mayla soichachin b'kanfeim ala kapayos." The kruvim were 10 tvachim high, and their wings hovered over, were raised over, were spread over them. So they were at the height of their heads, and they were soichachim, which adds to our meaning. We're looking for the height of a sukkah. Here we even use the word soichachim. So their wings were hovering over the kapayos. The Torah is referring to the wings doing a ma'aseh schach, and the wings are 10 tvachim high.
That's where I get sheltering. The word means sheltering or protecting.
Sheltering with your wings on the kapayos, right? So you see the word schach, the word sheltering means at a height of 10 tvachim.
Right.
So Gemara, how do you know that their wings were above their heads a drop? And that means there was 10 tvachim of clear space below their wings. Maybe their wings was exactly equal in height to their heads, which means to the top of their wings was 10 tvachim, which once again would mean including the schach. You wanted to say the schach is protecting an area of 10 tvachim below it, not necessarily. Maybe the 10 tvachim below it include their own space as well. It says so. Lamaila. So Lamaila tells us that it was above the 10th tvachim. Back to Gemara, all this makes a lot of sense. If all of the amos in the Beis Hamikdash, whenever we measured an amma, whether it was for the construction of the building or whether it was for construction of the kalim, it always referred to an amma of 6 tvachim. This calculation is perfect. However, Elul Rabbi Yehuda, the amma shel binyan shisha tvachim. When we're talking about the height of the Beis Hamikdash, and we give the shir in ammas or in tvachim, we give the shir in ammas. There, it's an amma of 6 tvachim. But v'shel kalim, whenever the Torah tells us that a keli is an amma, it doesn't mean an amma of 6 tvachim. It means an amma of 5 tvachim. V'shel kalim chamisha. So my now our calculation won't work out. Because let's do the math. If the urn is an am and a half, it's no more 9 tvachim high. It's now 7.5 tvachim high. Because if the am is only 5 tvachim, then 5 times 1.5 is 7.5. And then you have one more tefach for the kaparis. So the whole height of the urn is only 8.5 tvachim. The urn of the kaparis kama havalu tamanya upalka. It'll only be 8.5 tvachim high. So we know the Kruvim have to reach up to 1/3 of the height of the Beis Hamikdash. The Beis Hamikdash, or the Mishkan, was 60 tvachim, so it has to be 20 tvachim. But now the Aron only takes up 8.5. So the Kruvim, in order to have reached the height of 20 tvachim, had to have been in 11.5, because 8.5 plus 11.5 is 20. So kum techais, pashulahu chat shrei upalga. There's 11.5 tvachim left of space that have to be filled by the Kruvim. So are you going to say now that a minimum size sukkah has to be 11.5 tvachim? Aim a sukkah adahava chatzrei upalka. Maybe a sukkah has to be 11.5 tvachim high. So therefore, we're sort of stuck here. Elul Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to have to concede that you cannot learn the height of a sukkah out of the pasuk. So we have to say hilchas hagemirla. You have to say that the height of the sukkah, after all this work, we're conceding that we know the height of the sukkah, halacha l'moshe b'sinai. Dom Rab Chia bar Ashi Omer Rab. Rab Chia bar Ashi said in the name of Rab, shiurin, all the shiurim. Rashi gives examples like the shiurim of Yisrael, like a kazayis for an achilas iser, or a kaiseves, that is the shir how much you eat on Yom Kippur that creates an iser. Chatzitzin, we know that a chatzitza apostles when you're toivling. Umechitzin, and halachas mechitza, which is precisely what we're discussing here, that the mechitza is 10 tvachim, is halacha l'moshe misinai. But that's only according to Rabbi Yehuda. Of course, according to Rabbi Meir, we could still rely on this cheshbon. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, we're stuck, and we have to concede that it's halacha l'moshe misinai. Because it's not a tiyufta. It's not a tiyufta. Because Rabbi Yehuda knows that a mechitza is 10 tvachim from halacha l'moshe misinai. For the mechitza, that's right. Dr. Gemara, shiurim dairaisen you. How do you know? Frank Gemara, how could you say that all shiurim are halacha l'moshe misinai? Shiurim dairaisen you. We have sukkim to tell us the shiurim. Dichsiv, it says, and I think we're learning it in a couple of weeks, right? It's in Re'eh, I believe. Eretz chita usa'ira v'gefen uteina v'rima in eretz zei shaman udvash. The Omer Reb Chanan said that this pasuk that's listing off the Shivas Aminim, it's all about shiurim. So of course, all the Mepharshim ask, what do you mean the shiurim nemar? What do you mean the shiurim nemar? It's listing off the Shivas Aminim. The teretz is because right after that it says that Eretz Yisrael has everything. It says the lashon pasuk is that Eretz Yisrael has everything. So what does the list these off? It must be just to teach us shiurim. And they learn both episodes over here. The Torah wants to teach us shiurim. It's because when we were suddenly plunged into such wealth, like there's a famous analysis. They say whoever won the lottery ended up their lives getting ruined. So when we were plunged into Eretz Yisrael and suddenly we were exposed to such good fortune, it's very dangerous for us. So that's why the Rebbeinu Shloim made sure to include in the Paris reminders to all the mitzvahs, meaning the shiurim. It says over here in the pasuk, Eretz Hashaloi v'meskinus teichel b'lechem lo yisechser koil ba. And right before it lists off the Shivas Aminim. But it already says lo yisechser koil ba. So why does the Torah have to go list off now the Shivas Aminim? Everything Eretz Yisrael has to teach us that we need to keep at the forefront of our minds the chiyuvim we have to live in Eretz Yisrael. Chita is the leveis hamanuga. Chita is to teach us the shear of how long you need to be in a beis hamanuga for your clothing to become tummy. It's not we learn. Hanichnas leveis hamanuga. if you walk into a house that has a nega and you're not wearing your clothing, I mean, you might be wearing clothing, but the clothing that we're talking about, you're not wearing. The chaylav al kseifa, you're holding your clothing on your shoulders. In other words, you're not wearing them. Misandala v'taboisa biyadoi, you're not wearing your shoes either. You're just holding them. Huvein tamei miyad. They're all tamei instantly, because anything that comes into the house that has a nega becomes tamei. However, if you're wearing your clothing properly, then who tamei miyad? You're tamei the moment you walk into the base of manuga. But the heim tayrin actually yisha b'chtei achilas pras. You have to be in there a certain amount of time before your clothing becomes tamei, because the Torah tells us. If you eat in the house, only then you have to wash the clothing. So it's mashma that your clothing don't become tamei until you eat there. And the Gemara brings it right. It doesn't mean you eat there. It means the sheer of time that you would eat there. So you need to be in the house long enough that you could eat, and only if you're there that amount of time do the clothing on your body become tamei. And how long is that? You have to eat achilas pras. What is achilas pras? It's pas chitin. And Rashi says the reason why it's pas chitin v'loy pas ha'orin. So this is where the chitin comes in. That the timing of achilas pras is the amount of time it takes to eat wheat bread. Rashi says wheat bread goes down smoother, it goes down quicker, so it's a shorter period of time. And mesav oichel b'lifton, sitting it and eating it with spices, which also Rashi says makes it go faster. Although the Ritva is exactly the opposite. Chita is luxury bread. Mesav oichel b'lifton is eating it with spices, meaning you're sitting and lounging and you're eating slowly and you're enjoying. So the Ritva learns this actually makes the shear longer. Rashi learns this makes the shear shorter. And we'll make the shear shorter now because it's 6:56.
Nobody commented that people wore rings.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yossi, let me understand this string here. We started in the beginning to find the shear of a sukkah, and we're not sure what the shear of the sukkah was, and then we came back to all the way out to Kruvin, right? To try to figure out if it's 10 amas or not, and 10 tfachim or not, and then we're saying 10 tfachim is a lach l'moshe Yisrael, or we're not even sure lach l'moshe Yisrael. In other words, if we let go of the 10,
according to Yehuda, we're sure it's a lach l'moshe Yisrael, and according to Reb Meir, we learn it from the Aron.
Sorry, I came a little late. What was the connection between Sukkah and the Aron?
We were looking to know, how do you know that it's the minimum height of a sukkah wall is 10 tefachim?
But what's the connection?
The Gemara said that we knew that the Aron was 10 tefachim high.
So
And the Torah tells us that Hashem spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu from above the Aron, and Moshe Rabbeinu was below the Aron. And the Gemara brought down a member that says that Hashem never came down into our territory, and Moshe Rabbeinu never went up into Hashem's territory.
Right.
So that means that 10 Tvachim is the demarcation between the Rishus of man and the Rishus of God. So since it demarcates a Rishus, it's logical to argue that 10 Tvachim is what's considered the partition of a house. It's a little bit of a stretch.
Even though there's no connection.
Correct.
Okay. I thought I missed
very,
something.
And the Gemara goes into the whole opinion of we belong down there, she belongs up there.
No, unless you say a sukkah, we say the sukkah is like Rishus, a mile off.
I'm happy you brought that up, because that's what the Mefarshim say, that Sukkah is Tzeilah Dem Musa. Sukkah is the Rebbeinu Shalom bringing his Kedusha down to us. So that's what's appropriate to learn the height of a Sukkah from the domain of the Kedusha and our domain, because that's really what it is. We're going into Hashem's domain. They do say that. So you got to write a sefer.
Oh, please.
Okay. You'll hear often Chabad people refer to it as that we'll see the Geula B'lamata Me'asar Tvachim, because in the heavens everything above us are Tvachim, everything is clear.
But that doesn't do anything for us. We need it L'mata Me'asar Tvachim. We need it in our domain.
In the Rishus HaYachid, supposedly Rishus HaYachid, where the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't go, even though we know the Rebbeinu Shalom is everywhere. What do you think? The Rebbeinu Shalom is not L'mata Me'asar Tvachim? Of course he is. But here he's hidden. The walls can't. But Avada, he's very much L'mata Me'asar Tvachim. Can I just understand again the Kruvim, the relationship of the Kruvim to the Aron? What was that ratio?
So what we know as fact is that the top of the kruvim should reach to 1/3 of the height of the building. So in the Mishkan,
But again, I'm sullied a little bit by the image that Steven Spielberg did for the Aron. But the wings could have been above their heads. That's what I didn't understand. So when we're measuring the kruvim, are we measuring from the top of the wing or measuring from the head?
the wings were seem to have been right above the top of their heads. And we're measuring from the underside of the wing to the floor.
And the wing was above their head, so therefore really measuring.
The wing is
top
soilich on
of
top
head.
of 10 tvachim. So that's how we know that there has to be a clear space of 10 tvachim before you hit the roof. Just like the wings were right above 10 tvachim, so below them there was airspace of 10 tvachim.
Right, so when we measure a sukkah, the 10 tvachim, there has to be a clearance of 10 veloyad bechwal, not to include the
That's
schach
right.
as well.
That's right.
The schach only begins above 10.
I'll have you know that Eli Lerner had a very difficult time understanding this Gemara of 10 tvachim. How could 10 tvachim be a normal height?
He wouldn't have had no problem with Shlomo Skachevsky.